The first performance of Sophocles' play Oedipus Rex took place around 429 BC. Within 200 or more years, the Romans would start their invasions of Greece. And these invasions would continue over a period of many years, finally coming to a complete annexation in 27 BC. With each of these invasions, the Romans acquired a great bit in terms of land, but also with every invasion, the Romans took a bit of Greek culture. The Romans were great assimilators, and if they saw a practice um, that they liked, they would take it on and make it their own. And this is the way it was with theater and architecture and theater architecture, really. The Greeks appreciated, the Romans appreciated Greek theater, the writing of it, the structure of these Greek tragic plays, also the means of presenting them in terms of the theater, in terms of the staging of it. But the Romans felt that Greek tragedy, Greek theater in general, was barbaric. They did not appreciate it as it was. Uh, the Greeks have, or excuse me, the Romans have what is known as a seriousness of purpose. It is called gravitas, and that respectability has to be reflected in theater, the way the characters or individuals are represented on stage. For that reason, the Romans decided to hire a Greek playwright to rewrite these Greek classics so that they would appeal to Roman tastes. His name was Livius Andronicus, and he was a playwright, a writer in his own right, in his own experience. And while he wrote plays that were produced, he was most well known for rewriting Greek classics to make them more acceptable to Roman audiences. This does not mean that there weren't Roman playwrights. There were several. One in particular is a man by the name of Plautus. Plautus wrote comedies, and his comedies were more popular than these rewritten Greek tragedies. The Romans liked to be entertained, and we know that comedy usually is more entertaining than tragedy for most people. And Plautus's comedies were very popular and influential. His play, The Menechmi, influenced William Shakespeare's play, The Comedy of Errors. It is a play about mistaken identity, slaves trying to serve two individuals, two masters, more or less. So it had in it a great deal of comedy and a great deal of comic situations and circumstances. Very popular play. Plautus also, during this time, had a company of actors that were hired at times to perform for wealthy individuals. Um, this was still a time of festival theater. These performances did often coincide with festivals. However, for the Romans, these festivals weren't in honor of a god specifically. They were held for the enjoyment of the citizens of Rome. and they had a name for these performances, these festivals, and it was Ludi, Ludi, which means games. For the Romans, competition was uh, a great form of entertainment. We know this by hearing about gladiator contests or man versus animal, man versus man, um, feats of strength, acrobatics, juggling, um, trapeze, anything that would entertain the largest number of people. We are talking about popular culture now. What appeals to the greatest number of your citizens? And that's what the Romans went after. Another playwright that we have to mention who also wrote comedies, but not as funny as Plautus, was a playwright by the name of Terence. Terence's plays were more reserved, not as humorous, over the top as Plautus's plays. Also, there was another playwright by the name of Seneca, and Seneca brought tragedies to Roman audiences. These were very dark tragedies. And the one thing to remember in comparing uh, Greek theater and Roman theater, acts of violence could not be portrayed on the Greek stage. You could not have any sort of, while the plays were certainly violent and tragic and filled with death, those killings, that death could not be represented on stage. That all had to happen off stage, the act of killing. What the Greeks did, however, was bring the result of that killing on stage. The body of that dead person, of course, it was a dummy with blood all over it, but they were wheeled out onto the stage after the fact. The Romans didn't care about that. The act of killing on stage was something that certainly was acceptable. So the difference between the way plays were performed and the elements of the story revealed, such as death. Um, as we said, these were all a part of festivals and performances. The games or ludi were held throughout the year. Now, we also said that one of the aspects of Greek culture that influenced the Romans was architecture, specifically the design of their theatrical spaces, their theaters. Um, if you look at the theaters in ancient Rome, they greatly resemble, for example, the theater of Dionysus, with the arena design, the circular area in the middle, around this, surrounded by these tiered seats. The major difference between that circular area, that orchestra or performance space, was that the center area um, was not a full circle, it was a half circle. And that half circle actually jutted up to a raised stage. In the Greek theater, there was one level and there were stairs that led up to the facade where characters could go in and out. But the playing area, the orchestra, was on one level. In the Roman theater, there was an elevated section that was a bit of a stage. It was wide enough to serve as a street in front of this facade that represented a palace. Um, the other thing that made the structure slightly different from the Greek theater was that the seats those circular seats that in the Greek theater had a little separation on either side of that facade structure. Um, in the Roman theater, there was no space. It was connected to the stage. So it connected to that scene house, the seating area. Um, the scene house, by the way, remember the Greeks called it the skena. The Romans referred to their structure, the facade, as the scena frons. Scena frons, the same type of structure serving the same purpose, but a different name in Latin, not Greek. Audiences filled these arenas when these performances happen throughout the year. These structures, however, were not built to last. They didn't last very long. As soon as the festival ended, those structures were allowed to kind of fall away. They weren't maintained. No permanent structures were constructed for theater in Rome until the construction of the Theater of Pompey, um, not Pompeii, but Pompey, Pompey. That is a structure that still stands um, and is an example of the Romans creating something that would last longer than the temporary theaters that were constructed in the third and second centuries BC in Rome. During Rome's campaign throughout Western Europe and Saudi Arabia, the Mediterranean and Northern Africa, they constructed theaters. They left proof of their presence there by constructing buildings, and some of the buildings that they constructed over this time were theaters, and the remnants of those spaces can still be seen, can be found in these various places all over their area where their campaign led them. Um, as we said, the Romans appreciated um, entertainment. They wanted theater to entertain them, not to um, make them think too much. It was all about celebrating the power of the individual and having an opportunity to laugh. Humor, comedy was something that was appreciated and celebrated by the Romans during that time.